listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. Somewhere in between seminary and youth camp, it's Seminary Dropout. Let's go. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to break in here to announce real quick something that I think is really exciting in the life of Seminary Dropout, and that is that we are bringing on our first ever sponsor. And this is good news because it kind of ensures the future of Seminary Dropout is sustainable, or at least it's a step in that direction. The sponsor is Deidox Films. You can get there by going to Deidox.com. That's Deidox.com. Now, Deidox is a nonprofit that deals in film, and they make documentaries, short documentaries, that are meant to be shown in your worship gathering. Pastors can use them as illustrations, and they work fantastic with that, or just as a general part of your liturgy. Like I said, they're really short. They don't take up much time. They're beautifully made. Go check them out. One of my favorites is called James. The titles of most of these documentaries are someone's name that's featured in the documentary. And James is about a guy who's in recovery and learning about forgiveness. It's very real. It's very gritty. It's so good. Check it out. And then browse around there because there's tons of others available. And in fact, if you're preaching on something or if you're emphasizing something in your liturgy, you can search that subject and it'll bring up the films that will match that. So I'm really proud, really honored to be associated with Deidox. And I really encourage you to go check it out. If you're a pastor, like I said, you may want to use it. Listen, if you're not a pastor, tell your pastor or those who organize your worship gathering about it. Deidox.com, Deidox.com. Go check them out. And of course, I'll have some info about them in the show notes with a link. So yeah, you can find it there. Go check them out. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the show. My guest today is Donald Miller. Donald's the author of multiple best-selling books, including Blue Like Jazz and A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. He helps people live better stories at storylineblog.com and grow their businesses at storybrand.com. He lives in Nashville, Tennessee with his wife, Betsy, and their chocolate lab, Lucy. Don, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, this new book is essentially about your journey of becoming a person who was mature enough to enter into a marriage. And as you describe it, you've kind of had a rough track record with relationships in the past. Is that true?
Yes.
That fair to say?
Yeah, super fair to say. I think, just kind of in and out of relationships. My pattern was that I would, be attracted to a girl and kind of become codependent in the sense that part of my feelings about my self-worth depended on whether or not she liked me back. So I would get into these relationships. And then, of course, once I was in them, that didn't work. It didn't make me feel any better. It wasn't validating. But I would look over her shoulder and see some other girl and kind of get the same longing, even though I was already in this relationship. So now I'm breaking off this relationship and, kind of like a trapeze artist going from girl to girl. And none of it was really fulfilling. And, of course, leaving, a line of damage in my wake as I did that. And so finally, one relationship was very serious. We broke it off, and it was very painful for her. And I knew I've got to get help. I've got to stop this pattern. And that led to me going to a therapeutic retreat center where you get 9 months of counseling in 1 week, and continuing to see a counselor and working through some of the issues that kept me from really having intimacy with, not just with a romantic companion, but with anybody. And so the book is that journey. It's all the things I learned, just learning to get close to people.
Well, and a lot of your writing in this book is no exception, deals with the concept of vulnerability. If I can just reduce it to one word, some people, it seems, have more of a natural ability to be vulnerable than others. And it seems like it doesn't come as natural to you. And I'm the same way. It seems like there's something about marriage specifically that over time doesn't allow us to resist being vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, it don't work unless you can open up with somebody. The relationship has a glass ceiling. It's just not going to go any further. And in order to be in an intimate relationship, we have to be known. Just the other night, I was laying in bed and, the middle of the night, my wife was asleep. And I realized, there's one thing I've just never told my wife. It was a failure from my past, nothing sinful or scandalous or anything, but just something embarrassing. And I always resisted telling her, and it kind of bothered me. You've never told her. And she kind of woke up and said, "Hey, are you okay?" And I said, "Well, no, I've just never told you this thing." And I told her, and it was embarrassing to tell her. And she was just like, kind of rolled her eyes. She didn't care. But but at the same time, after that, I'm amazed at how close I felt to her and could walk into my own home feeling much more comfortable, like I wasn't an actor playing the heroic provider, protector role, which is great. But I acted that part without ever showing any of my weakness. And, it's funny how by telling somebody our weaknesses, they actually perceive that as strength, that you're strong enough to tell the truth about yourself and you're courageous enough to tell the truth about yourself. So it's very counterintuitive that we would share our weaknesses with somebody and they would actually think more highly of us than they did when we were hiding it. But it's the case. It's true.
Yeah, it seems like that's always the case, that if we've married well, it seems like when we choose to be vulnerable with our spouses, that's almost always met with kindness and understanding and a sense of relief and satisfaction afterwards.
Yeah. And I think that's not just true with our spouses. I think that's true with our closest friends and our teammates, people that we work with. I mean, there's a degree to which intimacy and vulnerability need to be earned to some degree. You don't just want to share your darkest secrets with the world because there are a lot of people who aren't safe. But when we're talking about safe relationships, I think it demands vulnerability.
As I was reading, I was really curious to know if you think it's easier to put on an act when you've achieved a good amount of success, because it seems like you can more easily hide behind how impressed people can be by whatever success you've achieved.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but it doesn't work. It isn't fulfilling. In fact, I have a friend who's mildly famous, and he's an actor, and he said he was really surprised that when he became really well known, he would walk into a room and he felt this pressure to be the person that everybody thought he was. And so he would act a role without knowing he was doing it when he was around folks. And he ended up creating a situation where he was isolated, where he just couldn't be himself around anybody. And so it was amazing that the more famous he got, the more lonely he became. And so I think to some degree with Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, the fact that we can project an identity, a lot of us are now struggling with that we've projected an identity that is only partly true. And so people know the best part of us or the most interesting part of us, or, us at our best looking when we're taking pictures. But that's not really us. And so what we do is we hide the real us from people. That creates isolation. And when we're isolated like that, our souls begin to atrophy. We begin to be more weak. Our mental health actually struggles. So it's super important that, the image that we're projecting is actually accurate. It's who we are.
Every once in a while, I'll have somebody contact me who maybe reads my blog or listens to this podcast, and they'll say, "Hey, I'm coming through Austin, where I live, on this date, and could we meet up for a beer or coffee or something like that?" And often I try to do that if I can. And a lot of times when I leave those interactions, I'll wonder if I'm the person that they thought they were meeting right then. And I wonder how much more so you might have those feelings being someone who's been a best-selling author and, people have been following you for a long, long time, where inadvertently some mystique may have been built up over time that you feel like you have to live up to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've learned to interact with folks in a different kind of way that, it took me a long time to figure out that they really, there's mixed motives for wanting to get together, and sometimes they just want to get together because their girlfriend read my book and they want to go back and say that we had coffee. So I'm like, well, that cost me a lot of time for you to be able to do that. And so it's really interesting. But, I do sense that people are kind of let down when they realize you're just a dude. And yet I don't want to pretend to be anything else because I actually genuinely want to connect with folks rather than just try to impress them. It's definitely a weird world.
You sort of went to what sounds like almost kind of an emotional rehab called Onsite to get some help with those relationship issues. I think you went after you kind of had a particularly nasty breakup. What were you expecting going into that experience?
Oh, geez, I was such a basket case. I mean, I really was at rock bottom, and I'd messed up so badly and hurt people, and I was just so emotionally torn that that's what forced me to go. And I had to do something about it. I'm so grateful that I did. I learned so many things during that week that I continued to be blessed with today. But it's a unique environment. There's only about 40 people who go to on-site at a time, and you turn in your cell phone when you get there, so you have no contact with the outside world. You can't give anybody your last name, and you can't tell anybody what you do for a living. So they basically strip you of all the ace cards that you would normally use in order to be accepted by a group of people. And you're just you. You're just you. You walk around, and if somebody wants to have lunch with you, they do, and, you have a normal conversation. I found it to be the most life-giving process, one of the most life-giving weeks in my entire life, if not the most life-giving week, because I was just me. I didn't say that I was an author. Nobody had read my books. Nobody thought that I was important. And come to find out, after we all revealed who we were and what we did, I was probably the least successful person in my small group. So it didn't matter anyway. It just reminded me, hey, Don, you matter for more than just what you do for a living. You matter because you're a person and you have a heart and you're having a human experience just like everybody else. And it was very, very life-giving for me to go there.
One of the things that happened there in a story you tell is that during one of the sessions, you were asked to kind of recall some things. And one of the things that you remembered was an instance in your childhood where you felt some embarrassment and shame. And it seemed like you had not thought much about that before, but that instance really had some repercussions in your adult life.
Yeah, I had this. There's a therapist there named Bill Loki, and Bill noticed that I was kind of cracking jokes at lunch one day, and he said, Don, where'd you get the humorous part of your personality? And I said, well, I don't know. And he kind of took out a napkin, and he showed us something that I thought was really interesting. He drew a circle on the napkin, and inside the circle, he wrote the word self. And he said, we're all born just a self, a person, and we have infinite value. And then he said, something happens early in life that is our introduction to shame. It's just this introduction to this idea that you don't measure up, or you're not good enough, you don't fit in, you're not smart enough, whatever. And he challenged us to try to go back and remember what that was. And for me, it was this instance in elementary school where I wet my pants and the whole class kind of made fun of me. And of course, you kind of laugh at it now, but at the time, 7, 8 years old, it was devastating. And that's where I realized I'm not good enough, or there's something wrong with me. Then he drew a third circle around the outer edge of shame. And he said, and this is where we cover our shame with our personality. So we learn from an early age that we'll be accepted if we're intelligent. And so he wrote intelligence in there. And we'll be accepted if we're funny. We'll be accepted if we say shocking things. That's where we fit in. Or we'll be accepted if we're athletic or if we're good looking. And we all have those things that we think that's the reason we matter. And Bill said, that's not the reason you matter. You matter because you matter. And there's no debating it. And he said, these are the personality characteristics that we develop to cover our shame. And so it's a great healing thing to kind of go back to wherever that shame came from and take an objective look at it as an adult and say, hey, there was no reason for me to feel ashamed, and kind of do some of that healing work. And that was part of the thing, the process that we went through there at Onsite. And it was incredible. I went in really desperate and came out so much more comfortable in my own skin and very centered and less reactionary. In fact, I came in attracted to a type of girl and left not attracted to a type of girl anymore. It was actually quite ground shifting for me to go back and kind of do some of that healing and stop reacting to the shame I experienced and instead live my life as a whole human being.
How long were you at Onsite?
The program was 7 days, and then about 6 months of following up with a counselor and continuing to go through the process that they started.
That's a pretty amazing transformation. Just like you said, being attracted to one sort of girl and coming out attracted to a different one. That's a pretty amazing, that's no small thing.
No. And my old pattern was I would use women to make myself feel good about myself. And once you already feel good about yourself, that hunger is no longer there. And so you can actually, stop using women and be in a relationship with them. It was a radical paradigm shift.
You mentioned humor being one of the things that you hide behind, and I can identify with that too. And I'm wondering if you have thought about that specific mask of humor, and then other kind of non-tangible characteristics like that make those particularly insidious masks to wear. Because I mean, if somebody is, say, hiding behind their good looks or something like that, I mean, that's in a way kind of fixed. Like there's not a lot of control over that.
Right.
But I've caught myself thinking, I am not accomplished enough or talented enough at some of these other things. I should really work on being a lot funnier than I am.
Well, we all have those things, and there's nothing wrong with them. I mean, I like writing, and so I try to, sharpen my skills as a writer. But I think there's a difference between enjoying something and experiencing it and desperately believing that if I'm not this, nobody will accept me. That's a painful place to be and a really painful way to live. And so I think it's worth doing the work. And not only that, when we suffer from that kind of low self-esteem or not believing in ourselves, we aren't the only ones who are damaged by that process. The people around us are. Because, my wife needs me to like myself. She just does. I'm a better person when I like myself. I'm more loving to her when I like myself. I'm more fun to be around when I like myself. The house isn't stressful if I enjoy myself. So it's counterintuitive to think the more you like yourself and accept yourself as you are, the more healthy your relationships will be and the more healthy the people around you will be. And yet it's absolutely true. We tend to go into the world thinking, well, if I could just change the world around me and change this person, and then my world would be great. And the real way to experience peace is to look in yourself and say, okay, what are these wounds that I need to deal with, and how are they affecting our relationships?
You and Betsy were set up by a mutual friend, is that right?
Yeah, well, Bob Goff is the one indirectly. Betsy ran a bed and breakfast in D.C., and I was there doing work. And Bob said, hey, go stay at this bed and breakfast that my friends run, and I stayed there, and Betsy was running the place, and so that's how we met. But Bob Goff is definitely done. And then, she wasn't interested in me for years because she liked me, but she sensed something was wrong. She sensed that I wasn't really healthy and that I had some patterns that she wasn't sure what they were, but she just sensed it. And it wasn't until after on-site, years later, almost 4 years later, that she and I ran into each other again, and she thought, something's different about this guy. And she was willing to go out with me at that point.
And it seems like that's part of what endeared her to you, is that she wasn't interested in the other guy.
Yeah, that was, and I always sensed that she was too healthy for me. I sensed that she could see beyond my issues, and I felt a little insecure around it. But after I did the work and got healthy, I thought, no, this girl and I are now compatible. And, it takes two healthy people to have a good relationship. If you have one healthy person, one person's not healthy, you're not going to have a good relationship. And so Betsy had done her work and I'd done mine, and we came together, and we have a fairly drama-free relationship these days. I think Betsy would say, she actually told me that her favorite part of this last year wasn't the wedding or the rehearsal dinner or all that beautiful stuff we did, but it was 3 months in when she realized the other shoe's not going to drop. This is actually going to be an enjoyable life. I remember thinking that too. I remember thinking, is this really happening? Like, we just enjoy life? And I thought, well, why not? We did the work.
Yeah. There's something that realization is kind of like a warm blanket because, I feel like my wife and I were pretty confident when we got into marriage, but neither of us had been married before, so we didn't know what it was like on the other side.
Yeah.
We had been told that the first year of marriage is super, super hard, and it was. But that realization that nobody's going anywhere and this is good, like I said, that's a real warm blanket.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very, very nice. And, it's a gift. I think it's just a gift from God that we get this spouse, this soulmate who loves us and accepts us as we are. And it's just a little bit of heaven if a relationship is good. And if a relationship is not, there's real practical work that we can do to make it better. And I think if that's out of whack, everything's going to be out of whack.
It seems like Betsy was and is good at not letting you avoid being vulnerable and using humor to hide behind.
Yeah, she's the only person who doesn't think I'm funny. Which is probably why I married her,
Yeah. You mentioned that having kids is something that was scary to you at one point.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about that?
It's a weird fear because, of course, we want children, but, I didn't get married till I was 42. But the downside of that is, I'll probably go into my retirement as a dad of a teenager. And right about that time when kids tend to rub elbows with you a little bit. I'm going to be nearing the final stages of my life. And I'm worried. I want my kids to like me. And so I kind of looked around at the healthiest people that I know, the healthiest teenagers and 20-somethings, and I found this common characteristic amongst their parents, and especially the dad. And it's this: the parents who willingly and openly kind of confess their sins or are okay with their flaws in front of their children tend to have really healthy children, and I mean really healthy children. And I think it would work like a dad saying, hey, I've noticed, son, you kind of got this really bad temper, and I want you to know you got that from me. You probably learned it from me, and I apologize for handing it to you. Here's the things that it has cost me in my life, and I really hope that it doesn't cost you those same things. Will you forgive me for handing you that? And maybe we could try to keep each other accountable or talk to each other about it every once in a while. But, you got to friend me if you ever want to talk about that stuff. That's a totally different attitude than some parents who really hide their flaws. And they think, if I'm not perfect or if I'm not powerful in this relationship, I'm going to lose control of these kids. And what happens is, especially in religious environments where we hide our flaws, kids grow up in a home where they don't feel like it's okay to be human, and it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to have flaws. And we have to hide those parts of ourselves. And so what they do is they go looking for somebody that they can be themselves around, and it's usually the opposite of whatever the parents represent, especially if it's religious. And, I've seen a couple Christian leaders. I'm thinking of two Christian leaders who really, if you criticize them, they get angry because they're righteous, godly men. And two of their children, one child, one daughter, and one son from each of these two different families committed suicide. So, it's not a joke. We have to teach our kids that it's okay to be human, or they really suffer. And, of course, the best way to do that is to go through the process yourself of understanding that it's okay to be human. Because a lot of those controlling mechanisms and posturing as somebody who's perfect, that all comes out of fear. If I'm not perfect, nobody will accept me. Or if I'm not perfect, I'll lose power. And it's deadly.
Well, that was one of the gems that I took away from the book because, I'm kind of with you. I'm a little bit younger than you, but my wife and I had our first kid about a little over a year ago. And the teenage years just kind of terrify me. And anything that I can take away, and that vulnerability, if that will make my daughter live into who she was meant to be, who God created her to be, then that's something that I want to give her and strive towards. So that was a beautiful part of the book. Thank you for that.
Yeah, for me too, because I was realizing that I'm probably going to be a pretty good dad. You know what I mean? Because I'm not going to pretend I'm perfect, and I felt like I learned that I had a superpower, that things are going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You kind of feel like, I look around at the landscape of teenagers and it just does not look good. And I look at some of the teenagers of people I know who are good teenagers, and you think like, what's the magic recipe there? What are you doing? And so I think that you're on to something with that vulnerability being a big key ingredient there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm grateful to have discovered it.
So you were, bad relationship and wanting intimacy in your relationship with Betsy were something that is kind of the impetus for you to allow yourself to be who you really are. And one thing I appreciated about the book was that it was about your romantic relationships and your relationship with Betsy, but you also didn't marginalize people who aren't married and may never be. And so, I'm wondering for them, and maybe the answer is the same for all of us, but how we go about trying to be more vulnerable, more real people.
Yeah. Well, I think it's small steps. I mean, just like the conversation I had with my wife the other day, to sit down with somebody and tell them a little something about yourself that you've been afraid to tell. And just see what happens. See how much closer you get. If you go too far, that might be a turnoff because they feel like they got to tell you something. But I think just trying it out. And, everybody who reads Scary Close says, I can't believe how vulnerable you were. And I got to tell you, I don't feel like I've shared anything in that book that I've never paid for being vulnerable. It's never cost me anything. People are so much more accepting than you can possibly imagine. And I learned something. I was in D.C. chasing Betsy, so I was there for 8 months. I had some friends who worked in politics, and one of them said, so-and-so politician kind of made a mistake, and he said, boy, he's really going to cook for that. And I said, why is it that, like, Joe Biden can do that and nobody cares, but this guy does it and everybody cares? And he said, Don, the thing is that this particular politician wasn't true to his brand, that he had presented himself as somebody who doesn't do that or make those kinds of mistakes, and therefore everybody goes to attack him when he does, because it's kind of like, we got you, right? We got who you really are. But if you sort of live out in the open, nobody judges you.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not pretending to be anything that I'm not. And it's just a wonderful way to live.
Well, it's a fantastic book. And my wife and I started reading it together on a road trip. And usually I was driving and she was just in tears in the passenger seat reading it out loud.
Oh.
So thanks so much. And thanks for being on the show today.
Absolutely. I so appreciate your time.
Definitely. Don, I've been doing this for about 2 years now, and so I try not to be too fanboyish. I enjoy everyone that I get to talk to, but specifically, I was looking forward to this interview because, however long ago, 10 plus years ago, when I read Blue Like Jazz, meant so much to me, and then your books since have too, man. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, let me know if there's anything else I can do for you. And let me know when the podcast comes out, and we'll tweet a link to it.
Absolutely. I'll do it. Have a great day, Don.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at ShaneBlackshear.com. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at @BeardOnABike. That's @BeardOnABike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care. I always seem to bring that, but there's still hope for me. This great